So is our first guest on the line. Scott, how you doing?
Hey Gene, how you been?
I'm doing well. I'm talking to you. Thanks for coming on. I know how busy you are, and I'm just gonna cut right to the chase because everybody knows you're a Virginia state senator and you're a big honcho in the legislature, and you got so many issues to talk about. I wanted to focus on something right away that I know you're passionate about, and I looked at your Twitter feed, which is S Surovell, at S Surovell, and you had a Twitter post about this case in Loudoun County involving something similar to what may have happened with the George Floyd case, although there wasn't anybody passing away, but it was a car stop. Could you just tell the listeners, and I got to do a shout out for the show. Hold on a second. You are listening to WJFNradio.com. You can call in live at 804-778-8888. But Scott, tell us a little bit about that case that you tweeted about, and I had a few easy layup questions for you.
Well, from what I read in the Washington Post, sounds like it was an African American man who was pulled over in the town of Leesburg for speeding, and after the officer stopped him, went up and looked in the car, and the officer claimed he saw what he thought was marijuana, some leftover leaves of it, sort of laying on the residue, whatever, laying on the console. And he asked the driver to get out of the car, and the driver said that he wasn't interested in getting out of the car. There was nothing illegal in the car, and he tried to roll his window up, at which point the police officer started punching him in the face and claiming he was resisting arrest. And it's hard to tell from the body cam exactly what went down, but by the time they got the guy out and had dogs around the car and everything else and down, they charged him with felony assault on a police officer, and they also charged him with obstruction of justice. And interestingly, they never charged him with marijuana possession because they never found any marijuana in the car.
Or gun.
Right, that's right. They didn't find anything illegal, and they ended up charging with obstruction and assault on a police officer, which is a felony with a 6-month mandatory minimum. And when they got to court, the Commonwealth attorney dropped all the charges and basically said that she felt that proceeding to trial on this might result in another George Floyd type community reaction. So that's what the Washington Post is reporting about. But I was interested in it because of one of the bills that I carry at this time.
Yeah, I'm gonna get to that in a minute. The qualified immunity bill you're talking about?
No, my assault on police officer statute to raise the mandatory minimum and make it a little harder to charge.
And I want to talk about qualified immunity, but focusing on this case that you just mentioned in the Post article, it's Commonwealth of Virginia versus Michael Wyche, W-Y-C-H-E. It's in Loudoun County. And I got to do a shout out for Commonwealth's attorney, Buta Bibarai. She got elected last November, and she made a courageous decision because this case was charged before she took office. And when you have, I was a prosecutor for probably way too long, but when you have an assault on a police officer charge, they indict or they file charges, as a prosecutor, it's very, very hard to dismiss those charges because the police, understandably, want the prosecutors to defend their honor, their safety, and their protection, and it can't be tolerated or must be a deterrent. So, Buta Bibarai, I give you a shout out, and the police. This shows that the police and the prosecutors sometimes have different lenses that they look through, and she did the right thing. Even though there was resistance, I don't think there was any doubt about that, but there was a little bit of disproportionality based on the video and the representations. But I want to go to your bill, Scott. Talk about the bill you just mentioned.
Yeah, so the bill that eventually cleared the Senate basically eliminated the 6-month mandatory minimum on the felony charge of assault on a police officer. It also said that before any charge could be brought, it had to be independently investigated by a different police officer and signed off on by the Commonwealth attorney, which right now it doesn't have to happen. Right now, a police officer can go swear the charge out themselves. And the third thing that it did was that, I guess those are the two things that it did. And,
well, Scott, let me focus on that, though.
Yeah.
What you're saying is, as it stands now, if I stop you and I'm a police officer and we get into an altercation and I think you assaulted me, I can then go to a judge and sign my own affidavit
Yeah, and that's the problem, is that it's the only charge in the books where the same person is both the victim, the lead investigator, the lead witness, and makes the charging decision. There's no other charge in the books that's like that.
Little conflict there.
Yeah, it's a huge conflict. That's why we put in that language. And by the way, the third thing I remember now, we also put in an option that said that after a trial, but only after a trial, a judge or a jury could make a misdemeanor finding if they found that there was slight culpability by the defendant, and also that they either suffered from a diminished mental capacity or they had a pervasive intellectual disability, which is statutory wordsmithing for autism.
So if the jury comes back, would this be jury demand? It'd be a felony, of course. It'd be a felony.
Starts off as a felony, but the jury could take it down to misdemeanor. I mean, normally an assault and battery is a misdemeanor normally, but when it's a police officer, victim, or a firefighter or judge, it's a felony.
I want to switch to another topic. Did you have any? Well, first off, could you give the lay of the land, sir, for the General Assembly, the House and Senate, and what may be happening next week or the week after in terms of the budget?
Sure. Well, after George Floyd happened on May 25th, we knew we had to come back for budget, but a lot of us felt like we really needed to do something more about criminal justice reform, and we also felt that in the aftermath of the George Floyd situation, we had a unique opportunity to get some things done while everybody was focused on it, while the public was focused on it. And so in the Senate, we ended up proposing about 28 different concepts that we incorporated into about 11 different bills. We put that out, I think, in June. The House came out with their proposal in sort of late August. And for about the last 45 days, about a day or two a week, we've been going down there and working through all this stuff. And we've got all of our bills pretty much done now. The ones that are passed, we've already passed probably about a half or 2/3 of the bills, and there's about a third that are left that are in what are conference committees being negotiated this weekend and Monday, Tuesday, and we're probably going to vote them all through on Wednesday and be done, is my guess. But there's a lot of big important bills going through, and I can talk about some of them.
Yeah, go through those bills, please.
Yeah, so the big one is policing reform, and that one's currently in conference, but that bill does things like bans chokeholds, it prohibits shooting into moving motor vehicles. It totally changes the officer decertification process. That's the process by which officers get their professional certification to operate as a police officer. So we're broadening that criteria so that police officers can't short circuit a decertification proceeding by simply resigning. And we're making records available between law enforcement agencies, so you can't just hop from agency to agency and agency without anybody being able to see your records or your past history. That's a lot of what happens is somebody does something bad and they just resign and quit and move. We've got provisions in there that define when you can use deadly force that require, de-escalation, looking at, whether force is proportional or not, for codifying all those things so that it's going to be the rules are going to be a lot clearer for everyone. We're prohibiting the purchase of certain military equipment from the United States government that we don't think law enforcement agencies should have. We're broadening up the training boards, requiring training on more racial sensitivity, de-escalation, cultural awareness, mental health awareness. We've got a couple bills, one to create optional civilian review board authority for localities with actual power in those boards. We have another one to enable what we're calling Marcus Alert, or mental health teams to be first responders at scenes instead of police. One of the big bills we passed will give prosecutors the authority to defer and dismiss criminal charges instead of having to give everybody a conviction. So they could actually tell somebody, hey, if you want to go out and do mental health or drug treatment or community service, after like a year, you can get a reduced charge or a dismissal instead of just having to plead guilty to what you're charged with. We're taking care of the Arlington/Norfolk situation where the judges are refusing to dismiss marijuana charges, and we're saying that if
talk about that, Scott. Give the listeners a summary of what's going on in that area.
Well, I've been practicing law 24 years, and of course, you've been practicing law longer than me. But
a little bit.
In my experience, when you go in front of a judge and you say, the prosecutor says, Your Honor, I want to dismiss this charge, and the defendant stands up and says, I got no problem with that. Usually it happens, and I've never had it not happen. But with some of the new Commonwealth attorneys that were elected in the last election cycle, some of the judges started to push back and say, we're not going to just let you dismiss whatever you want to. And that's just highly unusual from my point of view. So the bill basically says that if a prosecutor makes a motion to dismiss and the defendant says they have no problem with that, then the charge gets dismissed unless the victim to the charge can show there's some racial animus or bribery going on. That, I think, will sort of bring our law back to where it was for at least the whole time I practiced, and probably the same for you.
Yes, exactly. Hey, Scott, did they, in your bill or discussions in the Senate and House, any discussions on qualified immunity and changes to that?
Yeah, and I was tweeting about that last night, actually.
I
But,
saw that tweet.
yeah, so that's a real hard one. You know, in the Senate, we actually drafted about three different members drafted their own qualified immunity bills, and we tried to figure out if there was something we could do in the special session, but it's a really complicated area. And the House came with a proposal, and it basically said that if any police officer is sued for something in the course of their duty, that they have no qualified immunity defense. And the problem with it was a lot of different problems with it, but the biggest one is it was just too broad. And there's a reason that there's actual conservative, liberal agreement, progressive agreement on qualified immunity. The Second Amendment Foundation and the Alliance for Freedom both favor a qualified immunity repeal because you can use a qualified immunity repeal to attack firearm violence prevention laws. You can also use it to attack laws based on separation of church and state. So, for example, you may have seen yesterday, the day before, a man was arrested at a rally in Richmond, open carrying a
Yes.
revolver. Yeah, and Amanda Chase was complaining about, violating his constitutional rights. Well, he got charged with a violation of the new Richmond ordinance that was enabled by a bill we passed. Actually, I passed in the General Assembly last session. And that man could file a lawsuit against the Richmond police claiming that the criminal statute he was charged with for possessing a gun in public was unconstitutional, and the city of Richmond wouldn't have a qualified immunity defense. And, or for example, you saw there was the Trump parades that occurred out at the Fairfax County Government Center about 3 weeks ago.
That's right.
And so if the Fairfax County Police had tried to use any of our election intimidation laws, they also could have been sued on a First Amendment theory that we were interfering with political speech, and then they would have no qualified immunity defense. And so in the Senate, we feel like we need to really focus a qualified immunity repeal on abuse of force when police put their hands on people and beat them up, as opposed to just anything and everything police do. And so we're trying to figure out a way to do that. We're probably going to come back to the next session.
Let's now go to the Bipartisan Redistricting Commission. Could you give the listeners a stat? You smile and chuckle. Could you give us?
Well, I noticed you were careful to say bipartisan and not nonpartisan. I noticed that.
Yeah. I just read the article. Okay. Anyway, could you tell the listeners what's going on with this kerfuffle, as I call it?
Yeah, there's a lot of disagreement about that, and I was one of two senators in the entire Senate that voted against it. It was 38-2 in the Senate. In the House, it was much closer, and the Republicans are pretty much united in favor of it. The Democrats are kind of split down the middle pretty much. But, but basically the idea behind the amendment is we would have a 16-member commission, 8 legislators, 2 from the majority and minority in each chamber. So you get 4 delegates, 4 senators, and then 8 citizens that get selected by 5 retired circuit court judges based on lists that are determined by statute. It's looking like those lists are probably going to come from the legislature. So you're basically going to have 16 people that are affiliated with the legislature in a bipartisan fashion required to draft the districts for both Congress, the Senate, and the House of Delegates. And if they can't decide, and once they draw it and it goes to the legislature can't make any amendments. We have to vote it up or down. The governor has to sign. If he doesn't, then the Supreme Court draws. And they have to draw it based on criteria that is in the Code of Virginia, not the Constitution. And my problem is I think that criteria ought to be in the Constitution, because if you don't put it in the Constitution, then a future legislature can come up with criteria to require a gerrymander, right? I mean, you could always adopt criteria that says, that the districts have to be a certain shape or size or certain contiguity variables, whatever. You can say that the commission has to prioritize jurisdictional integrity, which tends to favor Republicans. I mean, there's lots of different ways you can draft criteria to favor one party over the other. And I don't like the idea that a legislature could still do criteria that could monkey with the commission. It's really not a bipartisan. It's really not a nonpartisan commission. I think it ought to be nonpartisan, not bipartisan. And
in a perfect world, Scott, what would you like?
What I would like is that if we had a bill that basically said that this is all done by computers, that we have a certain, they have mathematical formulas to determine compactness, contiguity, and also it's called vote waste, which is a formula that some mathematicians have come up with, which measures whether a district is over gerrymandered by looking at whether people's votes are wasted because they're too concentrated. And then I think you could maybe say the district lines could be adjusted by plus or minus 2% by a body of citizens to make sure that we have communities, kept together and stuff. But I think this could be, 95% 5% done by computer to take all the humans out of it, and then tweaked a little bit at the end, and then done. And that's the way I'd like to see it done.
Well, I'll tell you this: the 5th congressional district in Virginia is a joke. I mean,
well, they're all a joke, Gene. I mean, they all are. I mean, the 1st district starts in Occoquan, my district, and it ends in Williamsburg. I mean, the 5th starts,
isn't that amazing?
Yeah, the 5th starts up by I-66 and ends at the North Carolina border. I mean, they're
Danville.
Yeah.
But just so the listeners know, there's an amendment on the ballot November 3rd, and it's the redistricting amendment, I'll call it. And it's if it passes, Scott, then what happens in terms of the process?
Well, it's a big question because we never adopted implementing legislation, which is why there is implementing legislation being included in the budget that's being negotiated right now as we speak, that we might have to vote on Wednesday. And if that implementing legislation is voted through on Wednesday and the governor signs it, we'll have a lot better clarity. But if we don't, then we'll probably be back for another special session.
Right. Exactly.
But the commission basically has to draw some maps, I think. Well, part of this, Gene, depends on when the census data comes in. And if the census data comes in on time, then the commission will have to draw the districts probably in April, May. We'll probably have our districts by the end of May, probably. If the data comes in late, then the districts won't be done in time for next year's elections, and we could always have the possibility of elections 3 years in a row for the House and Congress, but that would be crazy.
Wow. Hey, Scott, we only got a couple more minutes, and you got a great sense of humor. I think I got a great sense of humor. My motto is levity is life, and I put this at the bottom of my little checklist here. I want you to give me an update, sir, Senator Scott Surovell, on a very serious topic in America. Can you give me a status of Devin Nunes's cow? What's going on there? I forgot. The last time I had you on, man, you got like 100,000 Twitter followers. What the heck is going on with the cow?
Yeah, well, first of all, the cow has a new friend. It's called Mike Pence's fly.
Exactly.
I just followed Mike Pence's fly on Twitter the other day. He was up to about, or he or she was up to about 50,000.
Hey, I know why the fly was on his head for 2 minutes and 9 seconds. He landed, and there was so much darn hairspray he couldn't get off.
Yeah, that was what I tweeted actually. Some other people
you did? You did?
tweeting about some other substances. Yeah, but I said hairspray must have been it. Yeah, I saw that.
Oh.
Really distracted from the debate for about 3 or 4 minutes.
Oh, more than that.
It's like watching a. I heard Clarence Darrow used to put nails in his cigarettes to make the juries look at his cigars while he smoked.
Oh my goodness!
Anyway, people were distracted by that fly. But anyways, Devin Nunes has filed all these lawsuits, and one of them got dropped, but he hasn't done anything to advance any of his subpoenas or his lawsuits. He just filed them here in Virginia, and Virginia has become a destination state for what we call defamation tourism. And, we have a Johnny Depp defamation lawsuit in Fairfax Circuit Court. We got the Devin Nunes cases. And
okay, why? Tell me why they like Virginia.
Because we don't have a SLAPP statute, and we don't have our summary judgment rules are non-existent. So, a SLAPP means a strategic lawsuit against public policy in a lot of states. If a big rich person sues a little guy, you can file a motion and say, Your Honor, I'm just being financially, economically bullied over a stupid lawsuit, and the judge can look at it early and throw it out. But Virginia, we just don't do that. So they all come here to file their defamation cases, and they say that, all the bits and bytes go through the servers out in Loudoun County, and that's how they get their jurisdiction, and that's why we end up getting a lot of them, combination of things.
Wow. Well, Scott, I can't thank you enough. We've covered a lot of territory. And so last question, I guess, I broke my little promise. I'm going beyond Pence's fly and
I'm probably talking too fast.
No, you're not. Give us a feel real quickly for the terrain in Virginia leading up to November 3rd.
Well, it's interesting. We're having a historical amount of votes that are being cast early, and it's going to be interesting to watch the results come in on election night because all the precinct results are going to be all screwed up because I think all the Democrats are probably voting early and all the Republicans are voting late. And, it's going to take so long to count those absentee precincts. We're not going to hear about results probably until 1 or 2 a.m. in Virginia. But, the state is clearly changing. And I think we're leading the country right now in early votes cast. I think it says a lot about the bills that the legislature passed last session, to create no excuse absentee voting and making it easier to register, and also doing the prepaid postage envelopes for the absentee votes.
Can you just tell us what happened? It made international news. At Fairfax County, they were doing in-person early voting. What the heck was going on at the county center?
Well, I guess there was a Trump parade that Trump supporters had already sort of pre-scheduled a parade, and their parade start and stop point was the government center, and it was the first day of early voting, and they all showed up with their cars and banners and flags, and they're sort of driving around the lot and encircling people, and people in the line, yelling at them and stuff, and it created a lot of chaos.
Wow. Did the police come by and just say, hey, tone it down a little bit, because it was getting a little loud?
Yeah, no, the police came by and they monitored it, and there is a rule that you have to stay 40 feet away from the front of the building.
Sure.
They ended up having to move. They moved everybody into the building, so people couldn't talk to them while they're in line. Because the government center is so big, they were able to get a lot of the line inside. But
wow,
the waits in Fairfax have just been off the charts, and the lines have just been like 2-3 hours long to vote. So there've been some big lines because there's only one place to vote early.
Wow.
So,
well, I'm having later on this hour, I'm having Kristen Cabral. She's with Fairfax. You know Kristen.
Yeah, sure. She's been heading up our election protection effort on the Fairfax County Democratic Committee, and she's right in the middle of that.
She's terrific. Hey, Scott, I know you're busy. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
No problem. Thanks for having me again.
Thank you. Bye-bye.